The Mystery of Bennington Forest. In the 1940s, the small town of Bennington, Vermont, was marked by a series of mysterious disappearances of people who walked the trails of the Green Mountain National Forest. The forest, with its dense shadows and immense trees, seemed to become an abyss that swallowed those who ventured onto its paths. One of the most notable cases was that of Paul Jepson, an 8-year-old boy who disappeared in 1950 while hiking with his mother. They were taking a stroll in the countryside when Paul asked to explore a little further. His mother, reluctant, agreed, but told him not to stray too far. When she returned to look for him, Paul had simply vanished. Even with the searches that followed, there were no traces of him. Later, in 1951, another person, a student named James Tedford, disappeared in an equally unsettling manner. He was traveling by bus to return home, and upon arriving at a stop, simply was not there anymore. Other passengers remembered him, but there were no signs of a struggle or anything indicating what might have happened. His belongings were found, but James was never seen again. The disappearances piled up, leading to speculation that the forest might be haunted or that there was a supernatural being luring its victims. Locals began to avoid the forest, and over time, the trails became abandoned, shrouded in oppressive silence. Those few who dared to enter reported a feeling of being watched, as if something was always observing them. To this day, the disappearances in Bennington remain unexplained, and the forest continues to be a place of mystery and fear. The stories of Paul and James and the other missing persons have become local legends, and many believe that the trails of the forest guard secrets that should never be uncovered. The Chappaquiddick Road Hike. In 1969, a group of friends decided to take a walk along the coast of Chappaquiddick Island in Massachusetts. The coastal road, lined with dense vegetation and ocean access, was known for its beauty, but also for a strange feeling that many people reported along the trail. During the hike, the group began to feel an unsettling presence around them. They heard soft whispers, as if someone was trying to communicate, but when they looked around, there was no one there. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, leading some to suggest it was time to turn back. One member of the group, however, decided to wander a little further to explore. He stepped away from the group and after a few minutes began to scream. When the friends rushed to see him, he was pale and trembling, pointing to a spot in the shadows of the trees. He swore he had seen a hooded figure that vanished as soon as he tried to approach it. Disconcerted, they decided to head back, but as they walked, they realized that the road seemed to have changed. What should have been a familiar trail now looked like a labyrinth. The trees seemed to close in around them, and the sound of the sea grew fainter. Finally, after what felt like hours, they found the way out of the forest. But when they reached the road, they realized it was the same one where they had started, but now it was night. The group decided it was best to go home. What should have been a pleasant sunset walk had turned into a night of terror, where they felt lost in an alternate reality, as if the island itself was imprisoning them. Years later, some members of the group still hesitate to return to the island, convinced that the hike along the coast had exposed them to something supernatural, and that the Chappaquiddick Road harbored a secret that should never be revealed. The disappearance on the Appalachian Trail. The Appalachian Trail is one of the most iconic hiking destinations in the United States, but it also harbors many dark secrets. In 2008, a group of hikers decided to traverse a secluded section of the trail. They were experienced and confident, but soon became lost in an area of the forest known as the Desolation. The first night was calm, but on the second night, as they prepared to sleep, they began to hear strange noises coming from the shadows. Something seemed to be moving around the campsite, but it was impossible to see what it was. By dawn, one member of the group, who had gone out to relieve himself, did not return. They called for him, but received no answer. As hours passed, the group decided they needed to search for their friend. The forests were dense and difficult to navigate, and soon they were lost as well. When they finally found their friend, he was sitting in a clearing, pale and wide-eyed. He appeared to be in shock and could not explain what he had seen. Suddenly, a feeling of terror gripped the group. They began to feel as though someone was following them, but there was no sign of human presence. The whispering voices began to echo through the trees, and a strange fog started to form around them. The tension mounted, and paranoia took over. The situation worsened when more members of the group began to feel the sensation that they weren't alone. They decided it was best to turn back, but now they were disoriented. The trail they once knew had transformed into a confusing maze, and the fog seemed to intensify, as if it were swallowing the forest. Finally, after hours of panic, they managed to find a way back. But when they emerged from the forest, they realized they had lost track of time. What should have been a one-day hike had turned into a two-night nightmare. Those who survived vowed never to return to the trail, convinced that the forest held something evil, something that fed on the fear and confusion of its visitors. The disappearance of Dorian in 2009, Dorian, an experienced nature lover, decided to go on a solo hike in one of the most isolated national parks in Colorado. He felt at home in the forest, familiar with its trails and paths. However, that morning, a strange fog began to spread through the area, enveloping the forest in a dense and oppressive shroud. As Dorian walked, the fog seemed to thicken, making visibility nearly impossible. The air was heavy with humidity, and an unusual silence filled the forest. Even the birds had stopped singing. Dorian, although nervous, decided to continue, convinced he could find his way back. After a few hours of hiking, he noticed that the trees around him seemed to shift. It was as if they were moving, creating a labyrinth that changed constantly. He began to hear whispers, as if the forest itself was trying to communicate with him. Alarmed, Dorian tried to turn back, but every step he took only deepened his despair. In an attempt to calm himself, Dorian sat on a rock to rest. When he looked up, he saw a shadowy figure moving between the trees. It was a shape that seemed to approach slowly, almost as if it were watching him. Dorian's heart raced, and in a panic, he decided to run. He fled for hours, not stopping to look back. Finally, at dusk, he emerged from the forest and found a road, but something was wrong. Dorian realized he was miles away from where he had parked his car. He was sweaty, exhausted, and broken in spirit. When he reached his car, he noticed something even more disturbing. His watch had stopped exactly at 3:33 p.m. He never explained what had truly happened that day, but he never returned to that forest. The shadows of Mount Shasta Trail. Mount Shasta in California is known for its majestic beauty, but also for its dark stories. In 1993, a group of climbers decided to ascend the mountain during the summer. The hike began as a normal experience, but soon turned into a nightmare. On the first day, as they climbed, the group began to feel a strange sense of disorientation. The sky was clear, but they started to hear echoes of laughter and conversations in the distance. They thought it might be another group of climbers, but when they called out, there was no response. The voices grew louder, but always seemed to be one step ahead, as if something was guiding them. When night fell, they set up camp. During the night, many awoke with the feeling that something was watching them. The shadows around the camp seemed to move, distorted by the light of the campfire. One of the climbers, named Sarah, began to have hallucinations, believing she saw human figures around the fire, whispering her name. The next day, the group decided it was time to descend. However, when they began to walk, they realized that the trails had changed. The path that had once been clear now appeared to be a never-ending maze. Each step took them further away from their starting point, and the feeling of despair began to spread. After hours of aimless walking, Sarah vanished. The group searched for her, but with no success. They finally managed to find their way back to camp, but when they arrived, they discovered that all their belongings had been rummaged through, as if someone had been searching for something. In desperation, they ran to descend the mountain, and when they reached the base, they vowed never to return. Sarah was never found, and the other group members were left with more questions than answers. Their story became a local legend, and many say that Mount Shasta guards mysteries that should remain hidden. The enigma of Taman Negara Trail. Taman Negara in Malaysia is one of the oldest tropical rainforests in the world, but it is also known for its strange disappearances. In 2011, a group of tourists decided to explore the jungle, excited by the opportunity to see wildlife and stunning landscapes. However, soon after entering the trail, they began to feel a strange sensation of being watched. The vegetation was dense, and the sound of their footsteps seemed to echo, intensifying the feeling of discomfort. They encountered a local guide who warned them about the legends of spirits that inhabited the forest, but they dismissed his warnings, thinking they were just stories. As they delved deeper into the trail, they began to notice unsettling signs. Trees marked as if someone had tried to climb them, and torn pieces of clothing hanging from branches. The atmosphere grew heavier, and the sunlight barely penetrated the tree canopy. One of the tourists, named Alex, decided to wander off from the group to take photos. When he did not return, the others began to call for him, but their voices were swallowed by the silence of the jungle. When the group decided to search for him, they felt increasingly lost. The trails seemed to twist and change, as if the jungle itself were altering their route. Finally, after hours of searching, they found Alex, but he was in shock, mumbling about eyes that were following him. He couldn't explain what had happened. The group, now terrified, decided it was time to return. As they walked, they heard whispers echoing through the trees, and the feeling of being watched never left them. When they reached the camp, they discovered that their backpacks were empty and their belongings scattered. They reported the events to the park administration, but no one seemed to care. Alex, however, never fully recovered from the experience and vowed never to set foot in the jungle again. The legends of Taman Negara continued to grow, and many visitors reported similar experiences, leaving the forest shrouded in a veil of mystery and terror.